Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome into our weekly Q&A session. Tyler is unable to join us. He had a little car trouble on the way over here, so it's just me and Alex today. The number one Tim Tebow hater, and go get Julio for you guys today. Alex, how you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good. Speaking of Julio, what a wild rumor for that to come out. So yeah, I hope he comes here. That'd be really fun.
and shout out to Mr. Schultz because we needed some extra content for the next couple weeks. Thank God. So we'll wait a couple minutes to get started here. Until more people trickle in. So you've got the Sixers shirt on, excuse me. Are the Sixers, is it their year? Like, are they going to get to the finals, man? What's your prediction in terms of finals matchup and who wins?
They could. I think it's going to be Nets Sixers Eastern Conference Finals, but I don't know if I don't know. That's what I think it's going to be. But their first two rounds are against like the Wizards and then the Knicks or Hawks, so they have a pretty coasty road to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Tyler sent you a super chat. He
$2.
Says, hey, Alex, enjoy an Eagles jersey on him.
Well, honestly, I might take that $2 and add 118 more and then buy a Tim Tebow jersey. That's
yeah, dude. You could get a Tim Tebow jersey. Oh, Tyler's paying for half the shipping. So there you go. All right, so we have some Patreon questions that we will get to as well, and we're going to talk about the latest on the Julio Jones situation, and then we'll open it up to the YouTube chat as well. So, Alex, you wrote an article yesterday. You did a video for us. What's your understanding of why the Falcons are trying to trade him, and what might it cost to acquire him?
Yeah, they seem to be wanting to trade him to get under the cap, obviously, so they can sign all of their rookies, and obviously they want to get under the cap anyway in the future, right? They're a rebuilding team. They clearly want picks, and I think they understand Julio's not really a part of the long-term future, so better to ship him to a team that sees themselves as a contender and get all of the draft capital you can. Obviously yesterday we saw in that Schultz article that the teams that he thinks he would be interested based on talking to some league sources are the Chargers, obviously the Colts, Patriots, Titans, and Ravens, and there was one more that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Niners. Yeah, Niners. I think that it would make a lot of sense for the Chargers if they want to go after it. And I don't normally I'm not normally like, oh, the Chargers should go get this player, right? Whichever player is kind of the flavor of the week in terms of a trade. But in this example, they only have one wide receiver who's locked up long-term with Keenan Allen. Mike Williams is playing on his fifth-year option. Tyron Johnson and Jalen Guyton, I think, are both restricted free agents. And then you have past that on the roster, Josh Palmer is there for the long term, obviously being drafted. But other than Keenan and him, there's nobody really locked in. So, you want to go get Julio if you're not going to sign Mike Williams to an extension. To me, it makes a lot of sense. And then in terms of what it would cost, I know a lot of people say first round pick. Definitely possible that it would cost that. But I also kind of think it would be like a late first round pick, sort of like maybe the Chiefs kind of Orlando Brown situation. But I think it would definitely take multiple picks, something like either like a first and a fourth, perhaps a second. I saw the PFF trade was like a second, a third, and a sixth. But, you can also potentially spread that out over multiple years, maybe like a 2022 second, 2023 third. And so it's not as terrible in terms of like giving up draft capital. But I also think he'd be well worth it. I know a lot of people talk about his injuries, or, he has had some over the last few years, but ultimately he hasn't missed many games, and it's not like he blew out his knee or whatever. They weren't major injuries in that sense. So to me, I just think, if you're confident in the fact that you're going to move on from Mike Williams, I would make the move.
I think it's definitely something that the Chargers should consider. We've talked on this podcast, like every time that there's, a certain player that, people think the Chargers should go get, it's like, well, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Like we kind of, had that conversation with Orlando Brown and Penei Sewell and like all these players, but Julio's in a different class, man. Like, I'm in general of the belief that if you can get your hands on a truly elite talent and it's on a relatively cost-controlled market and cost acquisition, then you go do it. And so, that PFF trade, you get a 6th rounder and Julio for a 2nd, a 3rd, and a 6th. Like, sign me up. I think it'll probably cost a little bit more than that. I think if they were going to get a 1st-round pick, it probably would have happened before the draft. So I think that ship has kind of sailed. Everybody in the league knows they're trying to trade Julio, so they're not going to get some crazy haul at this point. So,
well, but also the reason that they didn't do it before the draft, and the reason this is coming out 10 days before June 1st, is his contract specifics. So he would create, if he was traded before June 1st, $23 million in dead cap, and something like they lose $200,000 in salary cap space. Yeah. Versus if he's traded before then, I believe it's only $7 million in dead cap. And I want to say, they save like $15 million. That was from PFF Brad, I think. But yeah.
Yeah. So whoever trades for him will take on $15 million this year, and then $11 million each in the next 2 years, with an out after the 2022 season. That's according to the guys over at Over the Cap. So again, as Kevin Koenig points out, we didn't want them to take a receiver at 13, but we do want them to trade for Julio. That's a completely different circumstance. The odds that a wide receiver at 13 pans out into someone like Julio is really, really, really low. You could go get Julio right now, who's still an elite player. And I know everybody kind of wants to talk about him being injured last year. Before he got hurt and started missing games, he was on pace for 1,300 yards and 90 catches. So he's still an elite player. And like, I understand, people are kind of, apparently this whole thing that he's injury prone has stemmed from the fantasy football community because he's always questionable. I understand that. But as Alex said, he rarely misses games. He's played in at least 13 games every single year except for 2. And one of those was last season. So I understand the age concerns and I understand the injury concerns. But at the same time, like, if you can get B+ Julio Jones for a handful of mid-round picks and $36 million over the next 3 years, I think you do that. That's just my opinion, because I think in this kind of scenario, right, Mike Williams would likely request a trade after the Chargers traded for Julio Jones. So you trade a 2nd, a 3rd, and a 6th or 7th for Julio, and then you can get, maybe a 5th or a 6th for Mike Williams. I know that's kind of going to be low, but so essentially you're trading 2 picks for Julio Jones. I think you do that trade 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, and like, if Julio is ultimately going to play 14 or 15 games, maybe he misses 1 or 2, I don't give a fucking rat's ass about your goddamn fantasy team. Yeah. Like, holy shit, like, I don't care. But like, yeah, like, he is, to me, we did our wide receiver rankings episode, I think last year, and I ranked Julio 1, and you can certainly argue Devontae Adams or DeAndre Hopkins based on the years that they had. But to me, in terms of pure talent, like, I do still think he is the most talented receiver in the league, like, regardless of his stats last year. And like, out of all of the kind of win now moves they can make, like, I think Julio is kind of the one that makes the most sense. And, maybe they would trade Mike Williams afterwards, but if you could have at least 1 year where you're running, basically Keenan, Mike Williams, Julio Jones, Jared Cook, and Austin Ekeler out in your offense for a year, and then you move on for Mike Will in the offseason, like, that's crazy. That is crazy. So to me, I would kind of do it. And to me, if you can do the deal without giving a 1st-round pick, I don't know. But I just think the real thing that this stems from, I think, is I don't know how they feel about signing Mike Williams to a long-term deal. Right. To me, if you're not going to do it and you're not prepared to make him a 4 or 5 year offer, which is what he would want in free agency, then I think at that point you have to just kind of look to the future. And if that's Julio Jones, obviously they drafted Josh Palmer. But if you want Julio Jones to be your co-wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, to me, it's kind of too hard to pass up, especially if you're going to move on from Williams.
Yeah, even if you take Mike Williams out of the equation, man, you get Keenan Allen, Julio Jones, and then you have Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson taking the top off. You hopefully get some good development out of Josh Palmer. You got a good tight end in Jared Cook and Donald Parham, and you get Austin Ekeler as well. Like that, even without Mike Williams, that passing attack would be insane. And so Thomas Martinez asked if the Bolts got Julio, would that put unfair expectations and pressure on Brandon Staley? I think, we kind of talked about, the expectations of his first year. If they get Julio, I'm expecting playoffs. Like that train is my expectations because they're getting, Julio and Mike Williams do have similar skill sets in the sense of jump ball contested catch ability. But Julio ran like 4.3 on one leg, and he can run every single route in the book, and he's great after the catch. So if you upgrade from Mike Williams to Julio Jones, I'm expecting a playoff team. So I think if you're wanting to go all in on this year, which we haven't really seen them do yet, then go get Julio Jones and see what happens. So that's just where my thinking is at, because like there were some conversations yesterday. Obviously, I would love for them to be able to go out and trade for like an elite edge rusher or an elite safety to pair with Derwin James. Those players aren't available. Julio Jones is. And so I think it's a different kind of circumstance. And me personally, like if they can make it happen, I'm going to be so happy. And I think that's a trade that they should definitely consider.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of people talking about Devontae Adams, and I love Devontae Adams and the idea of him potentially being a Charger, but it's like, you have no idea if he's actually going to get to free agency, right? Like, what if, the Packers repair his relationship with Rodgers and, or even if Rodgers leaves, the Packers are like, hey, we can't afford to let Devontae Adams go, and they offer him some absurd $30 million deal, right? Like, to me, that is, you just can't bet on it. So when you get your guy, or if you get an opportunity to not pass up, like, you kind of got to go for it. Now, like Craig Smith says in the chat, I don't actually think they're going to trade for Julio if I had to bet my money on it, because I don't think, as they currently view it, this is a win now Super Bowl, Chiefs type team, or where the Bills are on the precipice, or some of the other teams, Cleveland in the AFC as well, right? I don't think they view themselves quite that way yet, which is why I don't think it would happen. But if you do it, like, I think you put yourself in a legitimate conversation with those types of teams.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is going to happen either. I think, the odds are, because I don't understand why the Falcons are even going to trade him, because if they were truly rebuilding, they would have taken a quarterback. Like, what's the point of taking Kyle Pitts and trading away Julio Jones? I think that really, I just don't understand the move there.
Well, but I think their thinking there is that they can't get rid of the Matt Ryan contract, which is like, why didn't you restructure that earlier? But also, like, he has like 50 million cap hits or something absurd versus like, so you can like, you can pay a team to take Julio Jones, or they'll pay you to take Julio Jones, but I don't think there's any amount of picks that you can trade a team to have a $50 million anchor quarterback on their roster when, after the draft, most teams are filled there already. So like, if your choice is like, hey, and they could have drafted a quarterback regardless of Ryan, but I think they have to have him for like 2 or 3 more years at the hits he's at. So, and there was also a whole thing about the GM wanted to take a quarterback, but Arthur Smith didn't. So like, that's a whole thing that we were talking about with Kyle Shanahan and the scouting department on the pod. But no, to me, this is like, it makes them a real contender immediately if they want to go get Julio Jones. And I don't think there's another move that you can make. Like, yeah, sure, you can sign Steven Nelson for depth, and you can go get some other guys for free agency. Morgan Moses just got cut in Washington, so if you want to pursue him for depth, like, but I don't think there's any other move this offseason other than Julio Jones that, like, changes what the trajectory of this team is, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, I don't think this is going to happen. It feels like this team, this organization does feel kind of how we feel, that they're 1 year away from the big push. That, this year is going to be about installing the scheme, building that chemistry, installing the culture. And if they make the playoffs, great. If they don't, then next year, they'll know what they have to fix. They'll know what their biggest needs are. And then next year they can go all in. So in terms of the teams that can trade for Julio, like somebody mentioned the Titans. I think Schultz mentioned the Titans in a thing. They can't. They don't have the cap space for him unless they do some other things. And so the Titans have like $3 million in cap space. And so in terms of the teams that were mentioned specifically by Schultz, you have the Colts who have 20.46 million in cap space. Obviously the Chargers at 20.45, the Niners at 17.66, the Patriots at 15.97. I don't know how the hell they still have $15 million. And then the Ravens have 9.7. So there's really not a ton of teams that can trade for him that fit the mold of what Schultz was outlining as being like one person away from being a contender that also have cap space, because the Titans, I don't even know their roster well enough, but they would have to do some serious restructuring to be able to fit in Julio Jones, which that would be awesome, right? You get Julio, AJ Brown, and Derek Brown as a casual football fan. That would be amazing to watch, but they can't make that work. Even the Ravens, they have 9.7. You got to get free up $6 million in cap space to get Julio Jones. I just don't think that's happening. So
the Colts, we'll see the Colts to me are the interesting team. That's kind of the one where it's like they can kind of propel themselves into contenders. Obviously, it depends on the Ginger Trader and what he can do at quarterback. But yeah, like if you can get Carson Wentz, Julio Jones, then that kind of propels him into rebuilding himself. Like that kind of strikes me as the team, considering the cap space they have, and they also have some other offensive weapons. That kind of strikes me out of that list of 6 teams. I sort of think they might be the most likely to do it, but they also sit on cap space pretty often and just roll it over to next year.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people were kind of expecting them to be aggressive, but like Daniel Vega just said, the Colts really like to save their money. It's very similar to the Chargers approach, right? They don't like to be aggressive unless they absolutely have to and go after a player like DeForest Buckner.
I would just be worried if I was a Colts fan about Carson Wentz and like whether Frank Reich could save that. So having a wide receiver like Julio or having one of those options to me would make me feel a lot more confident in the fact that that's going to work out, but we'll see.
And they don't have a lot of weapons. Like you want to talk about injury prone, like that's T.Y. Hilton at this point in his career. And unless you're really confident in Michael Pittman taking that big step forward, I mean, they don't really have that many weapons. So the Colts wouldn't be interesting. So, all right, we're going to get this. We have 3 Patreon questions, and then we'll open up to the chat. First question from Trevor Black. He says, what do you think Austin Ekeler's stats will be this year? So first and foremost, I do think that Austin Ekeler is going to be in for a monster season. And he's going to be in that Alvin Kamara type role that the Saints have always had. So I went back and looked at Austin Ekeler's stats from last season and projected it for a 17-game season if he stays healthy. So his game averages last year were 11 carries, 53 yards, and 0.1 touchdowns, because he only scored 1 rushing touchdown last year. And then he had 5.4 receptions per game, 40 receiving yards per game, and 0.2 receiving touchdowns per game. So if you average that out to a 17-game season, that is 187 carries, 901 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground, and then 91 catches, 680 yards, and 3.4 touchdowns. So that's a huge, huge season. Now, obviously, that's not going to translate from A to B, right? Because it's a different offense. They have 3 other running backs, so who knows how the carries and targets. Maybe they use him more as a receiver. But if you just take his pace from last year and put it into a 17-game season, that's a monster season.
Yeah, I also think it kind of depends on, like, is there going to be a legitimate RB2 option behind him, right? Yeah. Like, is Justin Jackson going to stay healthy? Can Joshua Kelly finally make that RB2 push? So for me, that's really the question. And obviously, I don't know what Larry Roundtree's role is going to be. on this team. But to me, it really depends on what's behind him, because we know what Austin Ekeler is kind of going to do. You could make kind of any list of numbers that makes sense, but something like, say 900 receiving yards, maybe his first 1,000-yard rushing season, that would be kind of cool with the type of offense that they're building there. But, so you could make any list of numbers that make sense to me, but I think it largely depends on A, can Austin Ekeler stay healthy, which I think he will, and then B, what is the running back room like behind him? Because, as much as that first 2 or 3 weeks of the season last year, we were feeling like, oh, here comes Joshua Kelly, he's going to steal RB2, and then he didn't.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just so up and down with production and what people can do. But yeah, I just think I think it's going to work out ultimately with Austin Ekeler and the numbers he's going to put up. It definitely makes sense that he can kind of be that Kamara role. I just don't know. Obviously, we'll have to see what the offensive line is too. That should be drastically improved. But I kind of want to see what all of that looks like first.
Yeah, so in terms of touches, Ekeler and Kamara have been pretty similar through their careers. Ekeler has kind of stayed around that 10, 11 carries and 5 to 6 receptions per game. And Kamara has been right at 12 carries per game and 5 catches per game. So the usage in terms of touches has been very similar. The difference is that the Saints, they use Kamara in the red zone as a runner and as a receiver. Like the touchdowns, the differential in touchdowns is absurd between the two, because Kamara had 16 rushing touchdowns last year, and he had 14 in 2018. And Austin Ekeler had 1 rushing touchdown last year. So the difference in rushing, like touchdowns and stuff like that, like that's the big difference. And that, I think, it stands to reason, right? You have Justin Herbert, who he'll probably get a sneak or 2 touchdown, maybe a couple rushing touchdowns. You have Jared Cook and Donald Parham and Mike Williams and all these receivers who will create mismatches in the red zone. So it does stand to reason that Ekeler doesn't get that many touchdowns again, but I would be hopeful that they used him more often in the red zone under the current regime than the old regime.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just really hopeful about him finally having an offensive line that can block for him. It doesn't require, doing like 40 spin moves and eluding tacklers all the time.
Yeah.
Like his first couple of years with the Chargers. Same goes for Justin Jackson. So, I'm just really excited about that.
Yeah, so either way, I think Ekeler's in for a huge year. All right, next question is from Sucktails, a.k.a. John Ayers. He said, where would you rank Mike Williams on the list of wide receivers in this league? Top 20, 30, 40, 50? Explain your rationale and maybe even list the wide receivers who you think are above him. So, Alex, probably you take that one first.
Yeah, I think Mike Williams is a top 30 to 40 receiver in this league. And I don't know if that's really like a diss to him, like, because people will hear the number and be like, that's low. But to me, there's so many great receivers in this league. And to me, Williams is firmly in that like sort of top of the wide receiver 2 kind of group. So to me, I think that makes a lot of sense for him around that range. Now I was trying to kind of look it up and be like, oh, who does he actually like compare to and who's in his range? And all I kind of found in like top 50 receiver lists were like, fantasy stuff. And I don't really care about that. It's just like, who's the actual better receiver? I wouldn't put him in the top 25 or top 30 because I don't think he would be wide receiver 1 on really any other team in the league. But I think he's firmly in that kind of, I'll say 35 to 40 range. I don't know exactly what guys I would put above him, but I would just say I don't view him as a wide receiver 1 on another team. Just, he's sort of in the top 10 of wide receiver 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think we've heard for the last 2 years that Mike Williams has been able to expand his route tree, and we just haven't seen it. And some of that is usage for sure. Some of that is his own doing. But I think if you you take Mike Williams and you put him on the Jaguars, is he a number 1 target over DJ Chark? Maybe. If you take him on the Texans, is he a number one target over Brandon Cooks? Probably not. So I think you've got to get to like the Lions, whose receiving core is awful, to like find a team where he would be the number one target. I think 30 to 40 is fair for him. He hasn't produced to be a top 25 receiver. He only has one 1,000-yard season. And so is he an elite deep threat in this league? Yes, 100%. Is he an elite receiver? No. And so in terms of receivers who you rank above him, I mean, you can go down a list. If you just type in, receiving stats, you could use last year, which was his better year. You have to scroll through like 30 names to find where he ends up. And granted that, again, that doesn't translate. It's not X, Y, and Z yards makes you a more elite player. But, I mean, you got Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen, Kenny Galladay, Amari Cooper, DJ Moore, DeAndre Hopkins, Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, Allen Robinson, Stephon Diggs, Cortland Sutton, Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup's kind of debatable. A.J. Brown, Odell, Devontae Adams, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, Calvin Ridley, Tyreek Hill. That's 20 names I think I just rattled off. So
right.
You have to get to like 25 until you're like, okay, I can see an argument here.
Yeah, the real question with the Jags is, could Mike Williams beat out Travis Etienne for wide receiver? And I think there's a good chance he could. But, I think there's like one or two teams around the league that you could find where he could be wide receiver one, and that, to me, just doesn't strike him as like, oh, he could be, a top 20 receiver. Like, to be a top 20 receiver, I think you have to be capable of being a number one option for sure.
Yeah. And it does stand to reason this year, right? We've talked about his expectations. Obviously, if he's on the team, he's the number 2 receiver now. There's no question about it. Hunter Henry is gone, and I don't think Jared Cook is going to take all of Hunter Henry's 90 targets. And I don't think Donald Parham and Trey McKitty will take that many either. So there's a lot of available targets because of Hunter Henry leaving. And that could theoretically Mike Williams, produce another 1,000-yard season. Obviously, he has to stay healthy, which he hasn't proven that he can do yet. But if he stays healthy, plays 15, 16 games, and I do think he can, be able to take that mini leap towards being a top 25 receiver. But, again, he's got to stay healthy. All right, last question here from Trevor Black, and then we'll open up to the chat. So if you've got a question, you want to make sure that we answer it. Don't forget to use the super chat feature. And thank you guys so much for tuning in last time. We were able to donate a lot of money towards AZ Bolt Gang and help him out. So we were really grateful for that. Again, if you want to make sure we answer your question, use the super chat feature. Last question here. Trevor Black, would you rather drink an entire bottle of soy sauce or an entire bottle of hot sauce? I think for me, it's soy sauce pretty easily. I'm not a huge fan of hot sauce. I like spicy food a lot, but I prefer it to be like seasoned spicy. I think like Frank's hot sauce, if that's the hot sauce I'm drinking, I'm taking soy sauce all day.
This is a tough one because I feel like hot sauce would be the worst immediate feeling, right? Because you would feel that burn. But I would also say that soy sauce would probably feel worse in terms of like how you feel for the next 24 hours, just because of how much sodium is in there. I don't know. I would probably take the soy sauce though, but Frank's Red Hot, I mean, pretty good. Depends on also what size of bottle we're talking about, because I feel like the bottle of Frank's Red Hot is bigger than the bottle of like those Kiko Man's soy sauce you get. But I would probably say the soy sauce for sure.
Yeah, I think this is a lose-lose either way. No matter what, no matter what you choose, you're going to be running to the bathroom as soon as possible.
I mean, these kind of questions feel like the Jigsaw which game would you rather play in fucking the Saw movies.
So good question from Trevor. You'd probably die after the soy sauce. I'd probably die after either one. But Craig Smith just commented something very interesting. He said that Larry Roundtree's running style reminds him of Mark Ingram, who of course was able to play for Joe Lombardi in New Orleans. I know you're not huge on Larry Roundtree, and I mean, I'm not saying I'm huge on him either, but I do think that's an interesting comparison, in terms of the contact balance and power with which both of those two players run. And if Joe Lombardi saw a little bit of Mark Ingram there, I think that would be an apt comparison in my opinion. So good point, Craig.
Yeah, I would say with Larry Roundtree, it's just like, I think he can be a decent goal line back this year and, use his power. Or if the defense is kind of like really tired, kind of worn down, say by fourth quarter, like I think, and let's say the Chargers have like a 7-10 point lead, I think you could probably run the ball with, Roundtree and just make him like a big body to tackle. Like I think Now, is he going to be Mark Ingram? That I don't know about. But I definitely think there's a role to be played that's kind of similar to that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, whoever is the running back 3 is probably going to play a lot because, I mean, Justin Jackson, like, let's be honest here, he's probably going to get hurt at some point. So whoever is the RB3 is going to play a lot. As Kevin Koenig just said, personal protector on punt block, third down blitz pickup. Roundtree is great at both of those things. And so I think we're going to see him on the field as maybe not get a ton of touches, but we'll have to see there. We had a couple people ask about why we were making fun of Tim Tebow and why you have your name today as the number 1 Tebow hater. So why don't you explain yourself right now?
I don't know. Like, I just don't think he's deserving of the opportunity to compete for the roster. Like, it would be a totally different thing if, like, Tim Tebow, like, 8 years ago, when he was in the NFL, like, was like, hey, I'm going to try tight end, right? Like, that would be different to me because it's like, okay, maybe he'll win, maybe he won't. But, like, he's 34 and, like, he's taking the spot of, someone who should be making the roster over him. Like, not that there's, like, great free agents out there or anything, but, like, I just looked the other day. It's like Tyler Eifert is out there. Someone who's been in the league a long time and was just on the Chargers. You have Virgil Green still out there, looking for a spot on an NFL roster, right? Like, and so, and I'm not saying you have to sign those guys, but honestly, like if I was a coach or a GM, I'd rather have a guy like Hunter Campmoyer or someone who's like a 22, 23-year-old undrafted free agent and, make them, give them a shot to make the roster. Like the Tim Tebow thing it reeks of celebrity. It reeks of privilege. It reeks of Urban Meyer. Like the whole thing is just silly. Like, and I'll say this: it's not a personal thing about like Tim Tebow either, because if Urban Meyer was like, hey, I want to bring him on to my coaching staff, and 100%. Like, he'll be in the film room. He'll be a strength conditioning guy. Like, if that was the case, I'd be like, fine, do it. Like, by all means, he
makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
he seems like a great motivational speaker, and he has a lot of enthusiasm and football mind, all that, gritty.
The blue collar worker.
So like, if that was the case, like, I'd be all for it. But it's just like, and the fact that they have Lawrence and ETN jerseys, and they have Tim Tebow jerseys also on their website. Like, it's just such a ridiculous publicity stunt. And that's why, like, I don't want to be against Tim Tebow, but I feel like the universe, and particularly ESPN, is pointing me in that direction.
I know, man. Like, if they hired him as a coach, I think I would understand that. Mm-hmm. And, there were some people that were like, oh, they're just signing him to take attention away from Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence doesn't need attention taken away from him.
And if I were Trevor Lawrence, I'd be kind of pissed.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how he actually feels about it, but it's like, I was just the number 1 pick and I'm supposed to be, the franchise quarterback, the savior of Jacksonville. And here comes Tim Tebow outselling my jersey 3 weeks after the draft. Like,
I know.
The whole thing is just so ridiculous.
And it's like, Trevor Lawrence doesn't need that help. I mean, he's been the presumed number 1 overall pick for like 8 years. So he doesn't need that. And I think
Tebow retired.
Yeah. And like, Colin Cowherd is a loon, right? But he actually made a good point about this. He's like, imagine if we saw Derek Jeter like come out of retirement 5 years after he retired, bulk up and play like first base. Like, we'd all make fun of him for doing that. And whichever team did that. And Derek Jeter was an amazing all-time great baseball player. Tim Tebow was awful as an NFL quarterback, and to do this 8 years later, it's just a big publicity stunt. And if Urban did this and Tim Tebow had been out of the league for like a year, then I would understand that. But it's been 8 years, man. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, like to me, Derek Jeter at least is a Hall of Fame player. Like to me, it reeks of like, what if a team wanted to sign Colin Kaepernick to be their QB3? Like, and just sell Kaepernick jerseys. Like that's kind of what this reeks of, and to me it's just like, it's a publicity stunt, and I have no time for this nonsense.
Yeah. So Sinvin made a comment, you guys should change the bet on Badgley's field goal percentage and make the loser buy a Tim Tebow jersey.
No, absolutely not. I cap it at the $20 value, which is what Tim Tebow's jersey should cost. But
well, apparently there's a knockoff site where you can get jerseys for $20. So
no,
there you go.
I would not buy that jersey for 99 cents if it was like a purchase I could get in the App Store, much less $20.
Nathan Rivera, yes, I am on the go get Julio Jones train. I think it would make a ton of sense and be a lot of fun. All right, guys. So comment questions. I know there's about 50 of you in here right now. So yeah, use the super chat feature if you want to make sure that we get your question answered. Pedro Ramirez, how do you think week 13 is going to go for the Chargers? Burrow versus Herbert. We kind of pegged that as a potential trap game for the Chargers. It is kind of sandwiched in between some important games, right before the finish of the season and all the divisional games. So I could see the Chargers losing that game, but as he alludes to, Joe Burrow versus Justin Herbert, that's going to be a ton of fun being able to watch the two best quarterbacks from the class, supposedly, depending on how Tua develops this year. But that's going to be a game that I think a lot of people around the league are going to have their eyes on. Maybe at week 13, you kind of have some jockeying for like yardage position and touchdowns and maybe reignite that Burrow versus Herbert debate. So I'm really excited about that matchup in terms of the quarterback battle. But I do think the Chargers could be in a sneaky trap game position there.
Yeah, I mean, I really just think of what is the Bengals offense this year. Like, I do think they'll be a lot better, but I don't know. They haven't really fixed their offensive line. I think they've made it better, but it's also not that hard to be better than what they were last year. So, like, I just hope Joe Burrow stays upright and we can have a Week 13 game and all that. Like, that would be really fun between those two. Like, that would honestly be between those two guys. If the Bengals are better than what they were last year, like, that could be like a cool Thursday night kind of primetime game. That'd be really fun. But yeah, I just think it's not going to be quite, Burrow versus Herbert is a lot of hype. It just feels like one team is kind of drastically better than the other at this current moment, and that's sort of what takes away from the matchup a little bit. I mean, it's on some level, it reminds me of like the Dolphins-Chargers matchup this year, where everyone wants to see Tua versus Herbert, and then the Chargers, just kind of go out there and lay an egg, and that's one of the games that started that like really bad losing streak they were on. Yeah. Just at last year, the Chargers were not as talented as the Dolphins on paper, so like. That's kind of how I sort of view it this year, though. I think obviously with Jamar Chase, and they have somewhat fixed their offensive line. I use that generously. That could be a decent game, but I don't know. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that game for sure. Scott Turner asks, who wins the wide receiver 3 job? I think that's kind of dependent on how you view someone having that job at training camp and having that job at the end of the season, because I do think that Jalen Guyton is probably going to be the wide receiver 3 to start the season. But I expect Josh Palmer to, kind of take over that role throughout the season bit by bit. I know that, draft capital, some people kind of debate how much that plays into playing time, but this team's going to want to see what they have in Palmer. They spent a 3rd-round pick on him, and this coaching staff, they didn't sign Jalen Guyton. They didn't sign, Tyron Johnson. So I do think that by season's end, it will be Josh Palmer as the wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how the season progresses, and also like which targets Justin Herbert tends to like. I don't know if Justin Herbert. I mean, we didn't know Jalen Guyton would be wide receiver 3 going into last year. We didn't know Tyron Johnson would play the role that he was going to play. I think that you'll have Guyton and Johnson kind of being those guys at the beginning of the season, but I could easily see Joshua Palmer, taking that kind of role away from them. He also kind of like wasn't used that well at Tennessee, and they also had a lot of problems. So like I have higher expectations than a lot of people maybe have for him. So for me, it's just like, I think you can make an argument that Guyton and Johnson are still wide receiver 3 or 4, but like I don't know how long they'll hold on to that, and like the team also may have to look into at some point moving on from them. So like maybe you don't want to be really dependent on them this year, based on the fact that they're both restricted free agents, I believe, next year. So and some team could offer, if Jalen Guyton puts up 500 yards, 600 yards again, some team's like, hey, here's $8 million. Then suddenly he's out of the Chargers pay grade. So I'll say wide receiver 3 will be, I'll actually say it'll be Tyron Johnson this year. And then as the season goes on, I do think Joshua Palmer will be playing more. And then, probably that'll set him up for wide receiver 3 next year.
And I will say, I think, Jalen Guyton's problems with dropping the football is not, I don't think it's going to fly with this coaching staff, because I mean, he was an Anthony Lynn guy. Anthony Lynn loved him. And so we'll have to see. Another thing to point out here, which Daniel Popper kind of outlined in his article about the Chargers offense, is that, a lot of the Saints playbook is predicated on matchups. So one week it might be Jalen Guyton or Tyron Johnson as wide receiver 3. The next week it might be Josh Palmer, and it might be Joe Reed. Like, each of these receivers after the top 2 are going to have their weeks where, well, granted, if Joe Reed makes the roster, of course, but it's going to be matchup predicated, which I think is going to be a nice change.
I did my Julio Jones video yesterday, and apparently I was listing the receivers at the end of the roster, and I said KJ Reed and Joe Hill in my video. So I just thought that was funny.
There you go. You're right either way. One of them makes the roster, and you got it. So Kinzel Tihamo, I hope I said that right. Do you think Staley can help Brandon Faison, that is, become a reliable rotational corner? What do you think there, Alex?
I mean, it's in the realm of possibility, but like I don't have huge expectations for Brandon Faison. I think as long as he can just be a depth corner and like, come on the field when his number is called, like I think that's kind of all I really expect of him. Based on like, if someone else goes down to an injury, but like to me, I don't know. Like I'm kind of higher on like somebody like Tevon Campbell than I am Brandon Faison, I guess, just in terms of upside and what they can do. Yeah. I do think Tevon Campbell had a decent year last year at slot corner, for what it was worth and what he could do while Chris Harris was out. So to me, I don't know. Like I just don't see him being a great CB1 or CB2 in much capacity. They're going to be playing Asante Samuel as CB2 from the jump. So it's just like, unless one of those guys gets hurt, I don't really see him playing too often.
Yeah, I will say I trust Faison more as a slot corner, I think, than Tevon Campbell, because I think Faison is, a much better tackler. And like that's the thing that I've always said about Faison is that he, he's a great tackler. And, when we were talking about in 2018 about Michael Davis versus Brandon Faison, it was always like, well, Faison is the tackler and Davis is obviously, a bit more, he's longer and faster. And so that was kind of how that conversation, and it's similar between Faison and Campbell. Campbell's not that much longer, but he ran a 4.3 at his Canadian combine. So he's definitely faster, and I think he is a little bit more skilled.
Can we trust the Canadian combine results, or are they like those pro day videos that people were?
Well, I mean, you do see the speed on the field, right. So that is the thing. And I do think that he's a better cover guy than Faison is. So I think between the two of them, you can kind of, cover the slot corner position just between the tackling of Faison and the speed and coverage ability of Campbell. So we'll see. Apparently, Chris Harris praised Brandon Faison in an interview. Kevin, was that with the Chargers Unleashed guy? Let us know where we can find that one. Let's see here. What else? Look at Herbert Man asked, what running back do you guys think will have a good season? Obviously, Austin Ekeler will be there. I don't know how much I feel about good seasons after that. Justin Jackson, I think, has the skill set to be a really good RB2, but he's got to stay healthy before I'm ready to say how much I expect from him this year.
Yeah, I think obviously Austin Ekeler will have a good year. Aside from that, I think Justin Jackson is currently the RB2, and I think if he's healthy, he is the second best running back in the room. But do we see that leap from Joshua Kelly? To me, that's the question. And honestly, after last year and, how last season ended, where he was just a healthy scratch in multiple games, I understand the coaching staff was bad, but it's like Joshua Kelly had so many chances, in my opinion, to take running back 2, and he just didn't. So I just have to see it when I see it. So to me, in terms of the second best running back in that room, I still think it is Justin Jackson, with a potential for Joshua Kelly to make that improvement. I don't think he'll be bad this year. I don't know what he is at this point, because I don't think he's a very good blocker. And I think just between the tackles, he isn't that great. But I do think on some level, I was talking with someone on Twitter, and I do think because of the type of running back he is, which is more of a power back, I do think the new offensive line will help him out. But to me, and Roundtree, I don't know, probably a goal line back, but I don't know what his role will be on past there. I know a couple people in the comments were just saying, a lot of people around the league think he'll play more than what the perception is. But we'll see. But Jackson right now is the second running back I have the most confidence in.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott Turner again. So guys, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left before I have to go run to a meeting. So if you got any last minute questions, make sure and type those right now. Scott Turner asked, can you guys talk about tight end? What do you see the splits being? Do you think Jared Cook is going to dominate time, or do you see more of a heavy rotation?
I see Jared Cook dominating time from the beginning, just because they don't really have a second string tight end that I think is capable of playing from the jump. Trey McKitty will be your prototypical, I think, blocking tight end. I think relatively quickly he can kind of fill that Virgil Green role a little bit as a blocker, just because, Donald Parham and Steven Anderson right now aren't much of blockers. Obviously, they can develop into that. I do think in terms of passing and in terms of receiving for tight ends, I think it'll basically be Jared Cook as tight end 1, probably Donald Parham is kind of your tight end 2, and then maybe Anderson or McKitty splitting time with pass catching, but maybe McKitty will surprise us this year and catch more than we think. But and then in terms of blocking, I think it just breaks down really when you break it down, McKitty is going to play a lot because he's a great blocking tight end compared to what else they have on this roster, because Cook is not a blocking tight end in any capacity. And past that, it's just is Parham going to be a good blocking tight end? I think he has, like Steven has said a lot of times, I think he has the facilities and the physicality to be that, but I just don't know. You can't call someone a good blocker until they're a good blocker. So I think we just have to wait on that. But I think Jared Cook is probably the most dominant pass catcher. I think you'll see Donald Parham still catch a few balls and maybe increase his volume from last year, and McKitty is obviously the number 1 blocking tight end.
Yeah, I do think that Jared Cook is going to dominate the passing aspect of the tight end position. Last year, for the Saints, he had 60 targets for 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. I don't know if he'll get to exactly those kind of splits because, we'll have to see how everything pans out in terms of targets. But I do think that Cook is going to be, essentially the tight end 1 in the passing aspect of things. But Parham and McKitty will play. Like they are going to play a lot. I happen to think that Steven Anderson will be cut. I just don't know, because he's not a blocker, he's not a special teams guy, and he's the third best pass catcher behind Cook and Parham. So I think Anderson's probably the odd man out there. So McKitty will play a lot as a blocker. I think last year for the Saints, Jared Cook, I think he only played like 45% of the snaps, if I remember correctly, off of PFF. So they'll play, but Cook is going to get, probably 50 targets, 30 catches or so, and maybe like 450, 500 yards, just off the top of my head there. So next question from Showtime Leo. What are your guys' thoughts on Herbert winning MVP this year? He's getting a lot more buzz recently as, again, that dark horse MVP candidate, similar to the Chargers and their Super Bowl odds. But if the Chargers make the playoffs and they win 12, 13 games, then yes, 100% Herbert has a shot. But, I think even if he has another big season in terms of stats, it has to come with wins, right? Because, traditionally speaking, the MVP of the NFL is on the best or second best, or, they're a top 5 team who happens to also, play quarterback usually and put up big numbers. So it has to come with winning. And I just don't know if the Chargers are going to win enough to put him in contention with a Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers if he plays on the Packers, Josh Allen, and that kind of tier of top tier quarterbacks who will also play for winners. Maybe Russell Wilson is finally able to get some MVP votes this year. But I think he has, in terms of like the people on the outside looking in, then yeah, I think Justin Herbert has that kind of potential.
I feel bad for Russ because that year where Lamar won MVP, he was like leading it for halfway through, and then Lamar just came in like a freight train and stole MVP from him. I think Russ could be an MVP candidate this year, but we've also been saying that the last like 5 years. So I don't know. I think he's it's tough because it's really just the best quarterback award, right? Like that's what MVP is at this point.
Pretty much.
And I think there's reason to believe Justin Herbert is a dark horse contender, but do I believe in year 2 that he's going to outplay Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers? Like, I just don't know if I see that yet. I do think if I had to predict over the next 10 years, will Justin Herbert win an MVP? Yeah, like I do think he'll have a chance to be like a top 3 candidate somewhere in that range. But to me, I just don't know if in year 2, also remember new offensive system, new players he hasn't played with before yet. Like, I just think it'll take a little bit of time, and maybe it's a year 3, year 4 thing where he really breaks out. But definitely a decent dark horse contender just based on the year he had last year and the fact that the Chargers offensive line obviously got better. But I don't know if I see him outplaying, some of the top guys in year 2, but it would be fun to see.
Yeah, obviously that would be awesome because, him being an MVP candidate means the Chargers are winning a lot of games, which would be awesome. All right, last question here. Do we think Brian Bulaga is going to remain healthy the whole year? Kind of, expectations with Bulaga in year 2 for the Chargers.
I think he can. I mean, it's just the thing where it's really tough to say because like a lot of Bulaga's injuries, we do want to, some people describe him as injury prone, but like a lot of his injuries last year really were like kind of unlucky where he just got like hit in the back of the head or like, some of that kind of stuff. I don't trust him to stay healthy for a full year, but if I were to bet, I would also say that it probably won't be as bad as it was last year where he was just like coming out of, the first, second quarter of games and then not coming back. Like, I don't think it'll be quite that on and off, but I do think there probably will be weeks where, he has to sit out or they want to rest him. But I don't think it'll be quite as bad as it was last year with him just coming in and out and Trey Pipkins or Storm Norton or somebody else coming in relief, or at least hopefully it's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll be as bad as last year. I don't trust him to play a full season at all. I think, at minimum, he'll probably have a game or 2 where he's just, a little sore and resting up. But I mean, you talk about a season from hell last year, man. He had a back injury, he had an ankle injury, he had food poisoning, he re-injured his back from Jonathan Abrams kind of spearing him. So it was just really unfortunate. And the odds are for Brian Bulaga that he'll play, 14, maybe 15 games. And if that's the case, then great, because we saw him be effective last year. He was like second in ESPN's run block win rate. So he's still an effective player when on the field. But I don't trust him to play a full season, but I do think that he will play much more. He'll start and finish games this year than last year. In terms of the swing tackle, before we get out of here, I think it's Trey Pipkins. But I do think Brendan Hymas could challenge him for that kind of role. But I think it should be expected to be Trey Pipkins going forward.
Well, we have to be bullish on Pipkins, Bert, Tom Telesco. So,
yeah. So, again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been a lot of good conversation. We'll cover a lot more stuff on Sunday during our episode. Hopefully, Tyler is able to be back as well. As always, make sure and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment or a rating on all of our videos. We do really appreciate all of your guys' support, and we'll talk to you on Sunday.